Hi, it's Lila Gran. So we've reached that time of the year where we list down the books we've read and the books we're planning to read for the following year. This video is going to be kind of like a recap of all of the books I read this year. I have read a total of 13 books. It's not a very good reading year for me, although I did read more books than I did last year. Just one book ahead compared to last year, but I just feel like maybe except for one or two books, everything just felt meh for me this year. Like nothing really captivated me, but still I'm very proud because I still managed to read 13 books. The latest book that I finished is Inferno by Dante Alighieri. I think that's how you pronounce his name. This is a translated copy by Alan Mendelbaum. I think I watched a vlog and I got curious. And unlike before, I actually did my research this time. And by the internet's consensus, Mendelbaum's translated copy is the most approachable one. And it lived up to its expectation. However, personally, I don't think I enjoyed this book. I don't think I'll consider buying or reading the remaining two books from the trilogy. I find it too unserious and I think it's comedic, which I'm not really a fan of. I was kind of hoping for it to be more philosophical, but it's more like SNL, like a mockery. It's just plain comedy. Hence the title, The Divine Comedy. It's okay. I'm not discouraging anyone from reading this. In fact, I am encouraging to read Mendelbaum's copy if you wanted to dive into Inferno or The Divine Comedy in general. The next book is the first book from the Poppy War trilogy. This is by R.F. Kuang, The Poppy War, the first book. I had a brief moment where I was really into fantasy. I wanted to go back to fantasy. I was really in the mood to read fantasy, and I picked this one up. I've been wanting to pick this up for a while, but I had more books on top of this on my list. I was at the bookstore, but everything that I wanted to get wasn't there, so I ended up buying The Poppy War. The first half of this I really enjoyed. I sped through it. I think I read this in 2 days. I think that's the fastest time I've read a book recently. I think because it's fantasy, that's just how it goes. It's very exciting. It's a very like adrenaline inducing, so you cannot stop reading. However, I found the latter half where I got to know more of the characters. I guess I gave them all a fair chance, and that's why I was just really into this book the first half. I was expecting like a major character shift, but it didn't happen, and maybe in the second and third book. But the thing is, I don't think I'm that captivated to, or I'm that attached to the characters that I will continue with the story. In fact, I already have the second copy, but I haven't read it and probably will never will. It's an okay book. I'm not a great fan of it. I wish I was. Right now, I'm probably, if I was a teenager, I'd be writing fan fictions about this book. But I just found the characters really petty, and just the characters were lacking depth, in my opinion. And that's why I didn't connect with them, or I didn't resonate, especially with the main character. I think her name's Rin. I didn't, there was no build up at all with the relationships that she's apparently built with the rest of the characters. So I find that really disappointing, especially for a high fantasy book like this. The next book is another Nietzsche. I think this is my fourth or third Nietzsche book now. Beyond Good and Evil. I've had high expectations on this book, primarily because this is one of his most famous work, and a lot of like famous Nietzsche quotes are from this book. However, I found that this is a mirror iteration of his other books. His previous books that I've read so far, when I read this book, I read Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Ecce Homo, and The Genealogy of Morals. So this is my first book, fourth Nietzsche book. Yeah, like I said, it's a mirror iteration, so it wasn't like jaw-dropping in my opinion, but I guess if you read this book first, if this is your first Nietzsche book, it will definitely be an eye-opener. But since I've read too many Nietzsche books already, this seems like a reiteration, like a repetition of all of his ideals. Next book, The Marcus Legacy by Cecilio Aurelio, PhD. I expected this book to be factual or to be more objective. However, when you read this book, it is giving the outline is very evidence-based. However, I found the tone of the text or the tone of the writing very one-sided, very pro Marcos. I think that's the main goal of this book, but I kind of just had a different expectation. So that part kind of threw me off, but it's still a very interesting take or a very interesting look to the time of Marcos Sr. I'm gonna speed through this because I still have a haul. The next book is Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. I really wanted to get into Dan Brown, so middle of the year I bought two of his books, the first two, Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons. And I read this book first. I shouldn't have bought two books at the same time. I kept doing that, like reading this or buying the second book without finishing the first book, and I end up not liking the first book, so the second book is just idling in my bookshelf and just there existing. Da Vinci Code. I watched the movie before. I love the movie. I love the story. If I read this book when I was maybe a young adult, I would have been so blown away that I probably be a big fan of Brown. However, because I've read so many books already, I find that the writing is too mundane or too simple. I don't know, I keep looking for depth this year, and I didn't get that for most of the books I read. So although it's an okay book, I wasn't as captivated as well. I think that's the main theme. I'm just not as impressed as I expected from all of the books most of the books I've read this year. So this is one of them. Next book I read, I thrifted this book. Look, my dog did. This is Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. It's an award-winning book, but it's a very depressing. I don't really read a lot of socially inclined books. Is that how you say it? Like books that has themes of current social issues like racism, feminism, xenophobia. I don't really like reading those types of books, and I found out about that when I read this book. It's just too... I don't want to be in that position. I don't want to put myself in that headspace. And so I didn't really enjoy this book. I didn't allow myself to enjoy this book, unfortunately, but it's a very good book if you wanted to read about those topics. It's a very personal. It has a very personal tone. The author has his way of making it feel like you're the one experiencing those things, and it's so sad. And yeah, I don't want to be sad, so I didn't enjoy this book. I do recommend it if you're into those topics. I read another book, Of Human Bondage by Mohan, I think that's how you pronounce his surname. I don't have a copy because my dogs beat the crap out of it, and I threw it away because it's just so bad. I don't remember much of it. Yeah, I don't remember much of it, so it must not be good. Moving on. What is that book about? I think I read this book and that book back to back, and they sort of have the same feel, like very depressing, and I guess I just wasn't really open-minded about that at the time, and so I just didn't absorb anything. I will probably maybe reread that book if I find it again. Next book I read, Written in History by Simon Sebag Montefiore. This is a huge disappointment. I had high expectations. The build-up is insane. However, when you read this book, it felt too bland, and too overrated. It just built it up so much that the execution and just the content, or for what it is or what it offered, it just didn't lived up to it. I expected the letters to be so groundbreaking, however they weren't, and they seem more like random petty letters. They just feel like mindless letters, and the outline and the spacing is just so frustrating. Like, it's not justified at all. The letters, look at that. It's so annoying. I hate that. The Wisdom of Psychopath by Kevin Dutton. Dutton. This is also a disappointment. It's just the title. There's just so much build up with the title. I had high expectations. It's more scientific than I expected, and I don't know what I was looking for, really. Honestly, I don't even know how to tell you why I didn't like this book, or why I didn't like most of the books I read this year. Because I honestly don't know why I didn't. I just didn't. And I read by emotions, mood, feelings. So if I'm just not in the mood, even if the book is really good but I'm not in the mood to read it, it's not gonna do anything. And that's my problem. That's on me, and I'm really sorry about that. But I kind of expected this to be more like a tell-all tale from like a serial killer's perspective, or like a CIA operative perspective, or a spy perspective, but it wasn't. It just felt more like textbook, and I didn't like that. Now, if I am going to pick the top 4 books that I read this year, it's these 4. And if you notice a pattern, they're all philosophy books. First is Sylvia Plath, The Bell Jar. This is not in my reading list, but I absolutely... Okay, first impression upon reading this book, or upon finishing it, I didn't like it. Or I did like it, but it was an okay book, just like the rest of the books I read this year. But upon reflection, I let it marinate, and I just absolutely... I couldn't forget about this book, about the main character's depression, her spiraling down, and her end game. There's this exact moment in this book, or exact scene in this book, that just stayed with me to this day. The philosophy of making choices and making decisions, and comparing that to a tree and the branches, it just blew my mind. And that's why I enjoyed this book. Realizing it upon now, I really like this book. This is my best read of the year, The Myth of Sisyphus. I actually read 2 Albert Camus this year, The Fall and The Myth of Sisyphus. And they're both equally good. Maybe The Myth of Sisyphus slightly better, but these 2 books changed my life. These 2 books saved the year. I really felt like the year was... But then these 2 books made it okay. I've talked about The Myth of Sisyphus in this channel, so if you wanted to know my thoughts on this book, just watch that. It's a short, I think 3-minute, 4-minute, 2-minute video. And The Fall is no different. It's also very good. These 2 books, seriously. The last book I have is Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre. This is also very good, but I think I would have loved this more if I had a different edition. This book, I read this book back to back along with The Bell Jar. So I keep mixing up the ideas from these 2 books, especially because they talked about a tree. This one talked about the fig tree, and this one talked about another specific tree. I forgot which, but they both talked about trees. And so I keep mixing that up in my brain because I read these 2 books back to back, but they're both equally good, and I both enjoyed reading it. I enjoyed reading this book more though. So yeah, those are the books that I read in 2025. Hopefully next year will be even better. I had high hopes. I do have a book haul coming up, so I wanted to share the books that I will be reading in 2026. But these are the books that I read in 2025.